Welcome to our living room.
Yes.
Here on stage. So we don't have a whole lot of time, and our hope is to kind of start off the conversation broadly with a few questions, but then open it up sooner rather than later to the audience to ask questions that kind of push the conversation where it might go. So if you want to start thinking about questions that you have, we'll open it up shortly. Oh, it's not up there. So this is, I think it's called Cultivating the New Food Movement, and we were kind of talking backstage about what the new food movement even means. So maybe let's start with exploring what it means for each of you. Sam, do you maybe want to start with
what starts? Okay, great.
What is the new food movement?
Hi, everybody. It's good to see you all again. Well, I'm the guy she referred to as thinking that the movement is bullshit. So I guess I just have to own that. Although I would not have used that term, Danny. I think there's a lot to be optimistic about, and there's a lot happening, but I definitely don't think we have a real food movement. I think when we use that term, what we're really describing is a cultural transformation in our food system, which is super important and the foundation of any other kind of change. And it's actually the hardest thing to accomplish. So, and by no means, when I say that, do I take away from just the amount of and the pace of change that's happening. And we've gotten a lot done. But we do not have a formed strategic movement. We don't have a political movement. And I got to experience that firsthand when in the White House, where and you could see what a movement looked like. You know, the environmental movement would show up to the White House with lawyers and lobbyists and advocates and policies written, laws that we needed to pass, people on the Hill, and we'd be getting our butts kicked every time something didn't go right.
I imagine there were some lobbyists showing up from the food world.
Oh, we were inundated with them and fighting them constantly. And on the food side, there was nobody. We do something that I know my friends wouldn't love, and I'd sit there and wait for the phone to ring. And it just wouldn't ring. I'd call USDA, be like, did you guys hear anything? No, and I'd have to go when it was in the internal policy decision, be like, guys, we can't do this, we're gonna get crushed. Knowing that we really weren't gonna get crushed. There was no policies written for us. There was very little infrastructure built to support this. And a great example of that is when we got into the White House, the only food studies program was here in New York, started by the great Marion Nessel, who I think will be here later, who, by the way, I got into that program and then I decided not to go to the White House, and hope one day she'll forgive me for that. Oh, there she is. There she is. Hopefully I'll get in again. And now they're everywhere, and it's I think a sign that we're starting to really build the infrastructure and the tools for real movement. But it's important to call out because I think we shouldn't give ourselves too much credit, and we also shouldn't imagine what's happening when it's not. Because ultimately, if we want to transform the cultural action and energy that's happening into real policy change, you have to, one, make voters care about this, which we have not done at all in terms of how they cast their votes. And we have not had a really effective presence in Washington that can really shape and tip the tides of policy. We've had some good coalitions, like on school lunch, which is why we were able to get as much done as we did. But generally, it actually has not been that good. I think there's big signs of progress, particularly as food and the environment and climate change start to coalesce and combine and kind of merge as issues. And we can, use, honestly, a lot of that infrastructure is being built as that side of the world realizes that food is going to be absolutely essential to solving the climate problem. We now have a bigger coalition and a lot more effort and resources that we can put towards this. But I think we haven't earned the title yet of a food movement, in my opinion.
Haile, you're here to change that, right?
She is changing that.
What does it mean to you, and how do you observe it from where you stand?
Yeah, well, I think First and foremost, to kind of like chill the vibes, it's like, this is a great time to have a problem like this, to be honest. Like, with all of the accessibility we have to information, to be informed ourselves, to inform our neighbors and people from all over the world, people who we may not relate to, like that potential in itself just makes it a really incredible time to have an issue like this. So I think when we kind of look at it through that perspective and redefine what even having a movement really looks like. For me, that's something that I've continuously been doing, is like redefining what certain actions and what my life looks like and how I can make an impact. And I think for the food movement specifically, what we need to do is kind of redefine what movement really means in terms of not necessarily climbing the traditional structures in order to make change. And for me, I have a nonprofit and we teach kids plant-based nutrition education. And so for us, it's a very interesting experience because we're not like working with any school districts. We work with individual schools, principals, teachers, and we bring in this extracurricular activity where kids are like learning about where their food comes from, how it grows, seasonal eating, different ways to prepare plants, why it's important and why it's good for their bodies. And it's like this kind of backdoor entrance to empowering these students so that when change happens on that bigger level, the kids are able to back it. And what we've seen with even school menus changing is like, there's broccoli on the menu, but it's like disgusting broccoli, and the kids have no idea why that's even an important change. So for us, it's kind of, instead of climbing this mountain, this insurmountable mountain, it's like going through it or even around it to kind of create a different definition of movement, so to speak. And so I think when we really realize that power of us as individuals, collecting our communities, going in and really kind of getting at it from a root level versus like, oh my gosh, like, I mean, it's very much a reality, but at the same time, it's like, what can we do about that? But other than, going right into that root cause. And so I think when we kind of look at it through that perspective, we're able to bring the energy that it needs. I mean, most major change that has happened in this country has not been through traditional routes. And so I think when we kind of view it that way, it's like, why not break the rules? Why not kind of bend them, see the different ways we can kind of attack it? I think that perspective opens up the possibilities versus confining us to this one way of making change. So I think as just individuals, like think of the little ways that you can start to make those minor changes, whether that's in your lifestyle or within your school community, your work community, whatever it may be. Like, how can that start to build out from yourself? Because I think even just in activist or advocate communities, we tend to forget about ourselves and how important it is to kind of build from that point. And so I think it needs to be more holistic in terms of just all of the different aspects we bring in to power this movement. This non-movement. Yeah.
The broccoli that you described, is that the broccoli that Sam helped put in schools across the U.S.?
Hey, there wasn't really much broccoli to begin with. I can't take responsibility for how it's cooked, school to school.
Yeah.
But you both work with, or have worked with kids in the past. I think that school is kind of an important starting point for where people generally come to understand what food means, the importance of food, what food is for them and for others. I didn't have a home ec class. I don't know how many people in the audience did. Is the absence of learning what food is, learning how to cook food in school, does that play any sort of role in changing how, what the new food movement means? How people relate to food, how we do it without forcing it upon people?
I would say I think there's just a general absence of teaching self-awareness in educational institutions, which I think is the core to all of our problems, is that there's this lack of connection to ourselves and nature and culture and traditions that have been beneficial to our planet, to our health and well-being. And so kind of having this disconnection from ourselves allows us to be disconnected from the world in a way. And so in school, it was my PE class was just running around and then afterwards going for a snack, and it's Twizzlers or something. And so there was this very one-sided perspective of learning about health and wellness. It's like, just exercise and like everything's gonna be fine, but it wasn't necessarily like, okay, obviously food is a big part of it, but also your community and also the world and the environment. And so I think there's an aspect of multidimensional groups coming together and really creating one idea versus like all these micro groups that are really just interconnected at the end of the day. And so if we start teaching kids about that intersectionality from a really young age, they're able to see themselves within the world and just the world in itself through a bigger perspective, and a perspective that's purposeful and empowered. And I think that's a huge part that's lacking. I mean, no one in school ever asked me like, well, what do you care about other than like math, science, and English or social studies? So I think just kind of encouraging introspectiveness is so important and is the foundation of actually being able to care about these things. And I think that's why my generation is now kind of stepping into the role, especially within the environmental movement, of like fighting for this, because we're able to access this information and inform ourselves and see how it connects to our lives, but also connects to others. So imagine if there are like, kindergartners who already have an awareness of this and grow up with that awareness and that care. That would be incredible.
I think one of the most important levers that Focus on School pulls is it reestablishes or resets what the norm is. So, before we overhauled the nutrition program, like you could sell literally anything you wanted in a vending machine, you could sell anything you wanted in the a la carte lines, and that was the normal. Like having a bunch of candy and chips and all the other stuff was just, and that's teaching what a norm is to a young person. And we got a lot of backlash from the high schoolers because they were like, I can't believe Michelle's taking my candy bar, which I took as a great sign. If you've pissed off a 15-year-old in that regard, I think it's like a good sign. But for like the 5-year-old who's now, my God, I mean, you were 10 when we started.
Yeah.
And she gave a rousing speech about 10 years ago, almost now, at our big health conference. Just got up there with no notes and crushed it. And now here you are about to release a book with HarperCollins. This is why I have hope, by the way, just on the side for our future. You're amazing. I'm so proud. I'm sitting up here like proud dad, like proud big brother, like tell him. And disagree with me. It's unbelievable. But I think the thing in schools is that, for that young person, like that's just the new normal, right? That's all that they've ever known is, food without all the worst of the worst. There's still a lot of improvement that needs to happen. With vegetables, I mean, the biggest fight we fought through the whole time while we were there was, do you have to serve the vegetable? That was like a fight to the death. Every appropriation cycle, we had a massive fight that nobody really hears about because we won it every time. But they didn't want to have to serve the vegetables to the kids. So as long as they had it, that was the goal, right? So now the fact that the kid, their expectation of a normal meal has a vegetable on it. That's a big deal culturally in terms of just that next generation, what they understand a plate should look like. Lots more to do. But so, I mean, I think that's the foundation of what's possible. I think, do schools have an important role? And I definitely felt like I left something on the table around not being able to crack like a home ec of the future, which is something I tried to, but we just really weren't that well positioned, honestly, to be able to implement something like that. Ironically, because all that stuff is state level in terms of how it gets implemented. But, in the end, schools are only going to be able to do so much on that. I mean, I think we have to, this is where the cultural part is so important, is that we have to teach each other and our kids how to cook and start reestablishing those basic skills. And, our schools will do some, and I would want them to do a lot, but we're also going to have to take ownership of that ourselves as well.
Let's, hopefully people have questions. Should we open it up for questions?
Sure. Yeah, you're the moderator, man. We're in your world.
We're opening it up for questions. Does anybody have a question? I think we have someone going around with a microphone helping, maybe?
Or shout it out, we can repeat it.
Or you can shout it out and I can repeat it. You raised your hand first.
Starting with the FDA is a bit antiquated in the way that they have defined a balance for health.
You're being generous. She said the FDA is a bit antiquated.
Thank you. And how
Nicest
they define a
compliment that
balanced
FDA's
meal.
gotten in a long time.
So again, just to repeat, I know the FDA is a bit antiquated about the way they define a balanced meal, and you're saying that there really is, I guess, no movement politically to change that. And I don't know when it was established, but I do believe it was a long time ago. You're trying to advocate for healthy eating in the schools, you know, impacts our children.
Yeah.
You know, how does the FDA, I guess, participate in that conversation, given that they might be giving misinformation?
When you're saying that, you're referring to like nutrition facts panel? Because
yeah, you know, what makes up a healthy meal? You know, I think they really advocate for maybe an excess amount of grains and maybe not enough plant-based meals.
So that most of that comes actually out of the USDA, not the FDA. FDA does nutrition facts panel, but USDA, like the plate, which is, we got rid of that pyramid and put in, institute the plate. I mean, look, there's a wide spectrum of what I think is good. And the fundamentals of what we know is a healthy, balanced diet have largely stood the test of time. I think there's a smaller gray where we can debate around certain things. But the new guidance that was implemented when we were in was fill half your plates with fruits and vegetables. Another quarter should be whole grains, and another quarter lean protein. And I feel pretty solid about that. If you think that now there's a lot of spectrum within how you fill that in, but as a basic guideline, that's 3/4 of your plate should be plant-based, all whole grains, fruits and vegetables. I'm happy to go up against anybody who thinks that's bad guidance. I think the science is real solid on that. Now, you can make an argument around dairy. Some people think dairy is like the worst thing ever. Other people think it's one of the most nutrient-dense things you can consume. It has its climate footprint. So there's plenty of things to debate. But generally speaking, I actually think we're in the ballpark on that. Now the question becomes, how do you take that guidance and then translate it into creating environments that make it easy for people to eat that way? And that's the key. I think we spend way too much, in fact, I appreciate you asking this, because I actually think we spend way too much time debating the what we should do. Because we basically all agree, generally directionally, where we need to head, which is way less hyper-processed foods, way less empty calories, way less, high carbohydrate, white breads and white pastas, toward nutrient-dense, plant-based fruits, vegetables, whole grains. And I think everybody largely agrees directionally. There's a lot in there. But what we don't focus on is the how. So we sit here and debate about the what constantly. And everybody's saying, yeah, I'm trying to change, but we have not done a good enough job figuring out the how. What are the actions, the businesses we have to build, the way the businesses currently operate have to change, the policies that need to be implemented, the resources that need to be dedicated. That's the how. And really we should sort of just agree to say, yeah, we generally all agree, and I'm not going to waste my time on the small stuff. And let's really dig into the how we're actually going to make the progress, because people are trying to get the how. We've convinced, everybody's sick. It's like over 80% of people say, I'm actively trying to change my diet. And about 20% of people report actually successfully changing how they eat in any way. And we got to focus on that gap, on actually making it easier for people to reach what they've already, we've convinced them. Everybody's convinced. They're not feeling well. They're like, okay, I got to make a change. So I think that's really where we should spend most of our energy and focus.
Next question. The gentleman who raised his hand first, right over there. In the middle.
Raise your hand, sir, so they can see you.
Can you raise your hand once more? Yeah, and then we'll get to you right after.
You mentioned that one portion of fixing the food system is to get voters to care.
Yeah.
What's something that you wish that the fellow citizens who are involved in the food system knew about the policy process? What kind of language, what kind of scaffolding do we have to build to be able to communicate to our legislature to fix this, or fix elements of it?
Yeah. Well, I think we haven't done a good enough job actually connecting these bigger issues to people's emotions and their sense of themselves and their communities and what's at stake when it comes to what we eat. And we spend way too much time up in our heads, and we have not connected these issues to how people make choices, which is an emotional based. That's why marketing works, because tap into people's emotions. And so I think right now, what's starting to happen, I think the area, it's not exactly, I think the way to where to your question is, what we are seeing is a real transformational understanding, I feel like, and happening pretty quickly around climate change and our environment. And I'm also seeing at the same time within the environmental movement, like, oh my God, you're right, food does matter. It's been a real afterthought. I mean, I was at COP21 trying to plead for people to pay attention to the food system, and nobody was talking about it. Like, no, it was all energy. And that's just a few years ago. And, and even coming back after the next one, President Obama was like, you know what, I think people are starting to pay attention to, to this food thing you've been talking about. Like on the global stage, right? Like, he's like, people are bringing it up more and more, right? So it's like, it's a really new thing. And it's by far has the biggest impact on the environment of any other system. Like, way more than, it's going to be the #1 driver of greenhouse gas emissions in the next 20, 30 years or so, depending. It's 70% of the world's water. It's the #1 cause of deforestation and land degradation globally, by far. So I think we're right now, as we start, really bringing food to the heart and soul of how we're going to solve our environmental challenges, and also they're going to be on the front lines of mitigating the impacts of climate, because it's going to be the first thing that's impacted. That's how I think going to be the most efficient way in to policy as it relates to our food system. I think trying to recreate something utterly independent where somebody's voting on food as a completely separate issue is something that I wish would happen, but I don't. I think we have a faster track. And by the way, I think the key is for that side of it, what food can bring to all that energy is that right now the problem that climate has is that it's like 2 degrees warmer. It's really cerebral as well. And nobody really understands or connects to that set of issues. That's why, like, the straw in the turtle's nose, everybody's like, oh my God, which is super devastating. Not to diminish the turtle.
Save the turtles.
I'm going to get crushed for that line. I love the turtles. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that. But I'm just saying that's what pulls on people's heartstrings, even though, like, straws are a problem, but they are, small part of the bigger picture. Food we all relate to. So when people think that, like, food, some of the things like coffee, chocolate, and wine are not going to be available for future generations because of climate change, people are like, oh my God, what? Like, we got to solve climate change. Why? Because they relate to it and they care about it. And so I think we can actually add a ton of value in terms of making these issues personal and emotional, because everybody eats and everybody cares about it. And what we eat is absolutely at stake. Like, our very ability to grow food is under real threat, and the idea that we can maintain the status quo, as unacceptable as I think we would all say it is right now, is going to be really difficult in the face of climate change.
It's not the ideal last note, but we're out of time.
And Danny, that was too short. So we're done?
We are done.
Man. We could be.
These are snacks.
This couch is comfortable. I got 2 little kids. I could just stay here all day.
This has been Cultivating the New Food Movement.
Thank you, guys.
There's a snack. Thank you.